So my name is Diona Gum, your FedEx host for this session. We will be targeting to run the session for 45 minutes with opportunity for Q&A toward the end of the session. For the Q&A, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit via the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. So just look for the Q&A button. Okay. So we shall begin this session. The first thing I would like to do is give a big thanks for our audience. We know we have folks joining from Australia, New Zealand, as well as the United States, Asia Pacific, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, the Middle East, and India. So thank you to all those who have joined ourselves today. And I'd also like to make a special thank you as well to all the small business owners out there and frontline staff for all the great work that you all have been doing over the past year. So we greatly appreciate small business, as well as the support from the various government agencies helping to keep our economies growing and alive. Okay, so to get started with today's session, allow me to introduce our guest speakers for today. The first speaker we have is Jack Liu. He is a trade advisor from the Australian agency Austrade. As you can see, Jack is based in Sydney and effectively is an e-commerce advisor. So definitely very experienced in trade facilitation and helping business in terms of going online with e-commerce. What I'd like to do as well, take a short personal moment to recognize Jack. Just to let the folks know, Jack has a special announcement. He is now the proud father of a baby girl, Ali, just born last week. So a quick congratulations to Jack and his wife, and also just a quick hello to Jack as well. Okay. Thanks, Jack. We'll be hearing from Jack shortly. Okay. Our next guest is from a Sydney-based company, Papinel, Renee James, who is the actual founder and CEO of Papinel, a beautiful luxury sleepwear provider who, of course, has launched online. We'll also be having the opportunity to hear from Renee's story about how the business for Papinel has grown through the e-commerce experience. And a quick hello to Renee out there. Good to see you, and thanks for joining us. Okay, for myself, the name Diona Gum, as you can see. I am based in Sydney, Australia, and representing FedEx on what many folks refer to as an international overlay, or in short, I help the sales team support international growth for the organization. So that's enough about me. For our agenda today, a few key topics that we will be discussing: the opportunities and benefits of going online, developing an effective e-commerce strategy, and definitely Jack has some good notes to share with us. We'll also be discussing shipping tips and cross-border considerations, leveraging digital tools, and of course, opportunity for Q&A as mentioned. So again, for our guests who have any queries, feel free to click on the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar. Okay. So very quickly, I think everyone realizes who has attended this call, the significant growth of e-commerce, especially over the last 12 or so months. I think a lot of our personal habits have really geared toward online shopping. So it's a very easy statement to make. In particular, we can see that there is particular growth, especially throughout Asia for emerging markets, whether it be, of course, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, or even the growth in India as well. And with the ability for digital wallets and faster connectivity, especially with mobile access, the rise of e-commerce, I think most folks will agree, is here to stay. So I won't share any more details about the statistics, but we will go into talking about having an effective e-commerce strategy. So moving on from here, what I'd like to do first is invite Renee to help share for our audience a little bit about the Papanel story, how you've grown it. We'd love to hear about these startup success cases. And of course, the impact of going online with your business. So Renee, over to you, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I started Papanel a long time ago, so in 2003 at Paddington Markets in Sydney. And I just really wanted to create natural sleepwear that was also beautiful and very different to what was currently out there at the time. And I did start at the markets, which is where a lot of people started. And then I went to retail and we launched our online store, gosh, probably 12 years ago now. But more recently, we have expanded into the US and we're going into China next year. And our brand has grown from being at the markets to the #1 sleepwear brand at David Jones. And then we went to Nordstrom and Dillard's and Bloomingdale's in the US, and it's booming over there as well. So we had a dedicated e-commerce store for the US launch just under 12 months ago, actually. And we've seen an increase of about 90% in sales to that region just within the first few months of launching a dedicated store for our US customers. We're doing the same thing for China, launching in June this year. We launched one in New Zealand 3 years ago and had the same uplift in sales. So we've definitely been part of that boom and part of that journey that a lot of other retailers are experiencing at the moment. And I think from the very beginning, from when we first launched e-commerce so long ago, every year we've seen the same amazing growth. So as you say, it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And I think it's such an important part of people's business.
That's excellent sharing, Renee. And I think I like what you mentioned about having those targeted, campaigns. And the fact is, when is a good time? Now and any time is a good time to do this. Yeah. So thank you again, Renee. We'll come back to you shortly to hear more a little about your story as well. Okay. What I'd like to share next is just some considerations about some exporting checklists. I hope the folks can read, I guess, the key bullet points. Maybe the smaller font might be a little bit too fine. The good news is we'll be sharing a copy of the presentation materials after the webinar. Okay, but for the moment, allow me to kind of summarize the key points here, starting from the left, and then of course there's step 12 at the end. Now, honestly, whether there's 12 points in a checklist or 6 points or 20, it doesn't really matter. Of course, you just apply what works for yourself. So really number one, and Renee's kind of hinted upon this, is picking your market, whether the intention is to launch worldwide or to target markets. Some of the key considerations would be, what is unique about the product or service that you are offering, thinking about the competition, and of course, potential regulatory issues as well. Commonly at this stage, a lot of companies would be writing out their business plans and even just doing something as simple as a SWOT analysis, talking about your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Okay, steps 2 and 3, pretty much interrelated these days because they're talking about using the internet, for research, and then generally doing the groundwork to research as well. This is where, apart from different marketing studies online, but also being able to talk to your local government trade advisors, for example, Australia and Australia, to help give advice about shipping to particular countries. And also a lot of government organisations and industry organisations also offer, in addition to the advice, funding programs as well. So there may be financial support that's also available. There are considerations about free trade agreements between aligned market economies, so you could take advantage of those. As I mentioned, being aware of the regulations, what trade documents may be required, or even duty tax considerations, which are quite important for cross-border. Okay, as we move along, we're heading towards step 4 now, talking about the physical shipping itself. Of course, there is the option for domiciled shipping to fulfill to your local market. So definitely, that works as well. But in the context of international, how to get it there, in most cases, the real options are by air or by sea. And for those who know, of course, over the past 12 months, there definitely has been some considerations and challenges, especially for air and sea freight. So also think, what is the expectation of your customer? Is it a door-to-door expectation? What is the expectation in transit times as well? Item number 5, also quite important, talking about the billable weight, because this will help determine what freight charge, if needed, that you may consider to pass on to your consumers as well. The key considerations really would be talking about the actual weight of the package versus the size or the dimensional weight. And, there are considerations for what's referred to as cubic or volumetric weight. The other consideration, if we're talking about freight charges, would be, the farther or the longer the distance the shipment has to move, and also the speed at which the distance has to move would also have an impact on the pricing itself. Okay, in terms of the services, so I guess we're looking at step 6 now. Depending upon the product that you are offering, is this a door-to-door customs cleared service, or maybe are there airport to airport considerations where an external broker needs to be engaged as well? So this will be depending upon your commodity, your business plan, the industry that you're dealing with. Okay. Number 7, in terms of preparing your shipment, well, really that's about having the right paperwork or trade documents, and definitely there's plenty of online shipping tools to help you with that. A little bit later in this session, I'll also mention the various FedEx tools that are available out there. Okay. In terms of the packaging, so step number 8, packaging also has a significant impact. This could be the brand experience, when your consumer receives that package or opens the package, what is the packaging going to be about? Are you going to consider using your own customized packaging for branding purposes? Some carriers, such as FedEx, also offer free packaging as well, or you may consider generic packaging. That all depends upon your business model. In addition to the packaging, that can also impact the billable weight I mentioned a moment ago in terms of the size of the package. So that's also an important consideration. And dependent upon your product, if it's particularly fragile or sensitive, also bear in mind, is the package safe for transportation, whether it be by road, air, or sea? Shock and vibration does occur. For example, in air, we know about flight turbulence. So is your packaging safe? Organizations such as FedEx also have facilities where we can offer to design or even test packaging to ensure it is fit for transport. Okay, in terms of the tracking capability, step number 9, again, what is the expectation for your consumers? Should they have the ability to self-track their shipments, or is your experience providing proactive tracking for your customer? Of course, many organizations have a variety of automated notifications as well as online tracking to avoid the need to manually retype in the tracking numbers again. So that's another consideration. Number 10, asking questions. I mean, honestly, we really recommend asking questions all throughout your journey. Definitely at the research stage, as I mentioned, talking to government advisors as an example, but also ask questions to your carrier. Hopefully you have access to an account manager, such as with FedEx, who can also give advice on shipping, whether it be about the trade documentation or the packing method as well. Even ask other companies that you are talking with in the same industry, for advice as well. There's nothing wrong with learning from someone else's experience at the same time. Getting toward the end there, so step 11, going above and beyond. So is there any additional value added experience that are you offering your customers? Now, that could be in the form of dedicated packaging or temperature control, or even something like, proactive monitoring to take the guesswork away from your consumer. Okay. Last but not least, really be ready to grow your presence, and that could be many things, but imagine as your sales orders, scale up when you launch to your online markets, do you have the resources and facilities to offer one, the agility, but also the scalability to deal with that growth of orders? And of course, it's all about growing and also maintaining your customer base. So those are just a few considerations. Again, we'll be sharing a copy of this portion after the webinar itself. Okay. So I think for the moment, enough from myself. I'll have a little bit more of a chat a bit later. So what I would like to do now is introduce Jack, our proud father from Australia, to share now about developing an effective e-commerce strategy. So Jack, thanks for waiting. Over to you.
Thank you, Dane, and thank you for your kind introduction. And as you have mentioned, definitely the best moments for me in the past week. A lot of nappies and formulas in the past week. And please excuse me if you hear a baby crying in the halfway of my presentation. But having said that, it's always good to be back and have some e-commerce time now. So yeah, before I start, a little bit of myself, e-commerce advisor for Australian Trade and Investment Commission. I think my role is focusing on helping Australian exporters to find new markets through online channels. Before I go into too much practical stuff, I just want to quickly share some overview of the current stats on the global e-commerce retail sector, especially for retail sectors. Next slide, please. As you can see in the map, in 2020, I think roughly about 18% of the total retail sales happened online, which accounts for 4.3 trillion, roughly US dollars, on online retail market shares. And if you're looking at different regions, APAC is definitely the largest e-commerce markets, with China being the largest e-commerce market around the globe, with roughly about 2.2 trillion US dollars, and about 44% of the retail sales actually happens online. And also in APAC, we have Japan and Korea, two of the top 10 e-commerce markets as well as markets like India and Indonesia, which is really fast rising e-commerce markets. And then looking over to the North America, we have the second largest e-commerce market being USA, and also Canada being around 6 of the largest e-commerce markets. And then we have Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. And then we have Middle East, Africa, and Latin America also being fast rising, increasing e-commerce markets. For Australian exporters, definitely China is the largest exporting markets for e-commerce, followed by the USA and then UK. Next slide, please. Now, I think everyone is keen to know what happened with pandemic recently, which did a lot of damage to the whole economy. However, if you look at different sectors, e-commerce is one of the very few sectors that actually boomed during the pandemic. Reason being a lot of countries having city lockdowns, similar to what Australia had in the past year, where consumers are limited to brick and mortar shopping experience and are forced to shop online, which really boost up the online activities all around the globe. And if you're looking at some of the trends showing in the slides, in 2020, despite that, the overall retail sectors decreased by about 2%. E-commerce still had 16.8% of growth. And if you can look at the total percentage of total sales in 2023, we're going to estimate that more than 20% of the transactions will happen online in retail sectors, which if you think about it, almost 1 out of 5 transactions will happen online versus the brick and mortar shopping experience. And as mentioned in the last slide, we have markets like China, where almost 50% of the transactions happen online. Actually, I think by forecast, as I speak, in 2021, I believe, forecasted by the Chinese government, by mid-year this year, the transaction that happened online will exceed 50% in the Chinese market. And also, if you look at the right side of the chart, which shows some of the fastest growing markets into e-commerce, and we can see there's a lot of Asian markets like Philippines, Malaysia, Indian, and also I think Indonesia was like 11th, which is not in the chart, but also have really fast accelerates in the e-commerce growth. And also, if you look at the top 10 markets, it's really all around the globe. You have Asian countries, you have Canada, you have European, Italian, and the Netherlands in the list, and you have Russia in the list as well. It's really spread around the globe, which showing a strong growth in the e-commerce sectors globally. Next slide, please. And from Austria's experiences, we understand that in the real world, it's a really complicated world, but we like to simplify the steps to help our exporters to understand how to start with your e-commerce journey. I think Ding has given a really good example of a 12-step chart in the earlier slides, but from our perspective, we wanted to break it down into 3 simple steps. Of course, in each step, you have very complicated ecosystem that you have to follow. But to think about your overall strategy, I think the first step, which echoes Ding's point, is to research and select your first target markets. After you kind of choosing your right market, this next step is to determine your business models and find your service providers. And then followed by setting up and maintain an online presence. Next slide, please, Alex. Now, look at the first step, which kind of being consistent from Ding and myself. I think the first question you should ask yourself is which market to go first. I think one of the benefit of e-commerce is it's really global facing strategy because through Google you can reach out almost to all the countries around the globe. Then it comes to questions with whether I should take on the world at once, set up a .com and just let consumer to reach you through internet, or should you actively choose your first market and really focus on the first 1 or 2 markets and to grow that markets before kind of expand to extra markets. Looking at the first strategy where you can just set up a .com, and if you're using your marketplaces like eBay or Amazon, you click the box and saying I want to sell to global. It's in a way it's good for you to do some preliminary studies and research to collect data to see where your product is having demand from. But the trick and the difficulty here is if you reach too much market, you will end up with a very complicated situation because each market will have different regulatory requirements, will have different languages, will have different logistic challenges. And if you stretch to too much market at once, you might find out yourself kind of focusing on no markets and having yourself into a really messy situation, which is why after you kind of gathering some data and understanding which 1 or 2 markets that your product have the most potential, it's very important that you narrow it down to 1 or 2 markets and really choose that your first 1 or 2 markets and really focus at that 2 markets to grow your branding and to grow your operations there. I think in terms of choosing your first markets, some of the obvious factors to consider differently is the market size, which obviously you want to find a market that have a bigger cake to have a market share. And the second thing is the growth rate. You want to have a potential market that your product can grow with the market as well. But apart from these 2 big factors, there are some other resources that you should consider before you choose your first markets. I won't mention all the points here, but some of the key points is really to understand the cultural background, whether you have someone internally that understand the culture that can help you to grow and to approach that culture that wherever you want to sell and have that language ability to sell to local markets. And also some of the important points is whether you have existing relationship in that market, which can help you to boost the branding in a short term of time. And also the maturity of e-commerce, regulatory complexity, it's also an important factor to consider as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Jake. Actually, before we go on to the next points, talking about the market factors, remember Renee mentioned that, launching, for example, to the US store just on a year ago, planning for China shortly. So Renee, could I ask yourself, based on what Jack has just shared, what particular factors did you consider when you launched, to your chosen markets?
Yeah, well, it's pretty much exactly what Jack said. We well, you know, we did some research on our own website by allowing our product to be shipped worldwide, and sort of got a gauge of what markets were responding the best. Obviously, in the industry that we're in, climate has a huge factor, because we sell clothing and it's winter in the Northern Hemisphere, and when it's summer here, it didn't seem to have an impact. We were still getting a lot of orders from the US and Canada. And then we got approached by a big department store there. And once it went into Nordstrom and started to sell through, we knew we had market acceptance. We knew that the customers loved the product. We knew that the sizing worked, the price point worked. You know, there might have been some adjustments in, you know, care labels, or definitely in seasonality. But we knew that the girl was the same as the girl that we sell to here, and she was loving it. So we had real confidence that if we were to launch a site in the US, it would hit the ground running.
Great, excellent. And nothing like, you know, having a buying signal with a large, or, you know, department store like that, you know, reaching out to you. So again, excellent, well done. Renee, don't go away. You know, we'll come back to yourself shortly. Jack, of course, back to yourself, please. There's quite a few other considerations, right?
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, definitely. So after you've chosen your first 1 or 2 markets, I think there's a few more things that you should consider when you are designing your strategies. It's not just about putting things online. There's a few things that you need to set up before actually actively selling to your consumers overseas. Again, in order to make things a little bit more simple, I actually kind of managed to put or group some of the points into 5 big talking points, which summarize to be regulations, sales channels, marketing strategy, logistics solutions, and payment gateways. Of course, under each topic, I feel like I could spend hours talking under each topics, but for everyone's time, and it's Friday afternoon, so I think I'll just give a really high level on each of the topics in the slide. The first big things that you need to consider differently is the regulatory requirements. I know through e-commerce, as mentioned earlier, you can ship worldwide, but there are regulatory requirements that you should consider. I think in the clothing sectors, it might be a lot easier, but if you're in the food and beverage, if you're in the skincare categories, definitely market entry registration will be something that you should be aware of, whether your product can be entered in the market without local registration or not can have a huge impact on your business model. And definitely then it's tax and duties, which hugely affect your pricing strategies as well in the local market. And the last point, which a lot of my exporters tend to forget, but also very important, is to register your IP and trademark, especially in some of the trickier markets such as China, that definitely registering your trademark, it's really the first step you should do. It's probably, if you consider China as your target market for the next 2 or 3 years, you should probably register your trademark now. There's a lot of good information from IP Australia that I recommend everyone to have a look, but I might just pause here for regulatory as a point here.
Yep, no worries, Jack. Much appreciated. And definitely this is important in that research stage, right? So of course, back to Renee. So when you targeted your exporting, were there any particular regulatory challenges that you faced?
Yeah, look, definitely with clothing, there are care labels that need to be in languages or have universal codes so that everyone can understand them. That was probably the biggest challenge for us because it's required at the manufacturing stage. Also, I think as Jack's slide says, import duties and taxes is a big one as well. I think a lot of customers aren't aware of what their own import duties are when they're buying online. And the US has a much bigger threshold than somewhere like Canada that's very low, and every single package going into Canada virtually gets stopped. And so you've got to decide, are we going to absorb that duty or are we going to ask the customer to pay it? And I think it's really important to be completely transparent with that on your website if you expect your customer to pay it.
Yep, thanks, Renee. Very important consideration, duties and taxes. Okay, thanks for that. Jack, back to yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Of course, after you kind of did your research, the next thing you should consider is where to put your products online, which I summarized as sales channels. So I think today, there's 4 major ways that you can put your things online. The first one is obviously setting up your own website, as Renee had done with her brand. And the second alternative is to consider online marketplaces such as Amazon, eBay. We have Catch in Australia, and also we have Lazada in Southeast Asia. We have Alibaba groups like Tmall, Taobao in the Chinese market. I think what's important here is understand that in the market that you want to sell to, what are the most popular marketplaces in that market? Because even though Catch is big in Australia, but they're not in many of the markets, and also Amazon isn't in everywhere in the globe. So definitely, once you choose a market, do some research on what are the online marketplaces in that market, and choose the right online marketplaces for your product. The third method is social media selling. So basically, apart from using Facebook, Instagram to promote your product, there's a lot of social media apps that allows you to actually open shops with the app. Instagram shopping is one of the great examples. And also in China, there's a little app called Little Red Book. It's also that combine the elements or functionalities of social media and product selling into one app. The last is I think it's quite familiar with some experienced exporter, is to sell through a distributor. So basically, instead of a B2C, which is a business to consumer approach, where you sell directly to your consumer, you find a distributor locally and sell through their channels. But ultimately, the distributor will set up their own website, or they will sell through a marketplaces, set up using their resources. So your distributor is likely to use one of the above three channels to sell to the local consumer. But you have to consider there are different business practices, there's different strategies if you're selling directly to consumer versus if you're selling to a distributor and then on-sell to a consumer.
Absolutely, Jack. I believe there's a lot of pros and cons depending upon the option. So like you said, it just comes back to, what is your own business strategy? And so for Renee, which particular sales channel did you use? And, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so we started off with our own website through Shopify. And then when we wanted to grow into other markets and have a more localized experience, we went to Shopify Plus, and that allows you to have different instances in different countries. And more recently with China, we're going to do that through WeChat, which is also, will also give our Chinese customers a more localized experience. So that's what we did.
Great. So again, it's kind of like customizing for the market as well. So excellent. Thanks, Renee. So Jack, now you have some sharing about the marketing strategies.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. So definitely once you have some online presence, it's really important that you build your branding through some social media apps, also through some SEO channels such as Google. And usually I think marketing strategy, so my experience is looking at different countries' products. I think marketing strategy is one of the things that are a little bit lacking from Australian exporters, because we believe in the high qualities in the R&D, and we spend a lot of money on R&D, especially in the food and beverage sectors. And we believe that consumer will like our product because we have a good quality. But remember, no matter how good quality your product is, you need to actively show to your consumer and let your consumer believe that you have those premium and high quality product. And in terms of the channels, the first one obviously is through search engines. I think Google covers the majority of markets, but you always have markets like China where Google isn't operating there. So you will have Baidu instead of Google. And in some markets, for example, in Korea, apart from Google, they have also a very strong local competitor called Naver, which almost is a 50-50% battle in Korea. So definitely when you're reaching out to a new market, apart from using Google as your primary tools to reach out to consumer, also consider if there's other search engines that are popular in the local markets. Yep. The second point is the product presentation. Which is a little bit interesting phenomenon for Australian product exporters as well. If you happen to go to Amazon or go to eBay in Australia, you probably find there's probably 2 or 3 photos for each of the product, and we're happy with those 2 photos, probably one in the front, one in the back. But in the Asian culture, the local consumer would want you to have as many photos as possible. If anyone had a chance to, shop around through online channels in China or Japan, you will find they have slides of product presentations in their product page that goes from the original country of the product, brand story, to how the consumer are using it, a little guide of how to use the product, and goes on and on. So it's really important that you have a really good product presentation, especially if you are trying to reach out to the Asian markets. I think social media apps is very obvious. Again, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube covers the majority of the markets, but in markets like China, WeChat and Weibo, it's probably the stronger social media app there. And also in Japan, you have Line and other, localized social media apps as well. So really be careful and do some research and understand what are some of the hero social media apps in the local markets. The last point is key opinion leader. Again, I feel like I can talk hours on the KOLs, but just a quick explanation. KOLs, key opinion leaders, basically meaning online endorser or bloggers, as we call them in your old-fashioned ways, that they're not necessarily a celebrity, but some famous person online that can recommend your product directly to the consumer, and they're very, very powerful and becoming more and more powerful in recent years.
Thanks, Jack. I think that's kind of like the rise of the influencer. Okay. So for Renee, a couple of questions for yourself about your marketing strategy. So the first question, so which social media strategies did you use, and what was your experience with that?
We use them all.
Okay.
Facebook, Google, Instagram. We obviously social media is a big part of selling online now. So we do use them all. We use a lot of targeted ads, and you can grab a lot of information from your consumers through Shopify and your target market, and then find lookalike audiences in the same person as you have in Australia, but you find the lookalike audience for them in the States or in whatever market that you're going to. So we do a lot of sort of targeted social media advertising, and we are also using WeChat for China. And I think getting localized influencers as well. It's just getting people in that market to wear it and try it and talk about it. It becomes a little bit more real and a bit more authentic that way.
Yeah, and especially, seeing people in the streets, or well, I guess in sleepwear, we probably would not see too many people in the streets, but know that they're enjoying it in their own homes.
Yeah.
So the second question now, a part of this focus is about exporting, by going online. So for your overseas, your new, customers overseas, did they react differently on social media as compared to your domestic audience?
Yeah, look, it is a tricky one. I do really like to be, I keep using this word, but I really like to be authentic in social media. I think that's just, it's the only way to be. It's why people watch. They want real experiences, to see where you really work and to see what's really going on. And, it definitely doesn't always translate. So for example, last week we had so much rain in Sydney, and then finally one day the sun came out and we posted something like, thank gosh, the sun's out. It was something to that regard, which just would have been lost in translation to the rest of the world. But there's social media advertising where you can be more sensitive to their climate, and then there's just your generic social media where I think you just need to be who you are. And we all realize when we're following an American company or a Chinese company that they're in China or America, and we understand that when they're talking about winter, it's our summer. It's just the world we live in. So you can't be everything to everyone.
Yeah, I guess it's just having that open or global mindset could be another way to say it. Thanks again, Renee. Okay, so moving on, Jack, talking about logistics. I guess this is dear to my heart at FedEx. So back to you, Jack.
Definitely. With Ding here, I probably won't talk too much of logistics solution. He's probably the master of it. But again, just some quick little topics that you should be clear of. I think just to summarize differently, you need to think about your pick and pack facilities. You need to consider which of the partners 3PLs that you want to use. For example, FedEx is a great example here. And we got Ding, excellent, have great knowledge about 3PLs and international freights that you should really consult with. And also first mile, last mile, and international kind of freights. It's also important that you think about your cost structure, you think about your models. And definitely one point that I forgot to point here, and it's very important, is also have a really sound return policy or return strategy as well. Whether you need to think about the return strategy is definitely your call, that you can make up the return policy as you wish, or whether the local regulatory framework that has set some guidance on the return policies there. You need to be considering that as well. And also if there is like a very relaxed return policy that's required by the local market, like 7 days, no question asked return policy that has to be put in place. What are your return freight strategies to minimize your loss there as well? Again, Dane is probably much better than me to explain this part than myself.
No worries, Jack. I'm sure we can have another session on that, but even just thinking about the shipping considerations for return shipping could be a totally different experience to the original export. Okay. Now back to Renee. So in terms of your shipping, especially for export, how did you manage that process?
So we use Ship It as well, and we obviously use FedEx, and they're fantastic. So FedEx for all our international orders, and we also use FedEx for returns as well. We do just interestingly talking about returns, we've just launched a new portal we use a service called Loop Returns, and it allows customers to sort of choose to return, refund, or rebuy or respend their money. It's a really good interface to stop straight up returns and for refunds. But definitely for international, I think you've got to use someone like FedEx that has, all the documents are now, for us, we can do them all electronically. We're not printing anything out. And it is a one button situation as opposed to back in the day when we were filling out, commercial invoices and airway bills. It's much simpler now.
Right. Thank you. We appreciate that endorsement, Jack and Renee. And Renee, in terms of the pick and pack process, did you have to manage that in any particular way?
Yeah, look, we still ship all of our orders for Australia and the US from Australia through a 3PL. In New Zealand, we ship from a 3PL over there. And in China, we are using a 3PL based in Hong Kong. So pretty much 3PLs everywhere.
Yes, I think there's growing demand for that as well. Thanks again, Renee. And coming back to Jack, we're now talking about the money side of the business. So the payment gateways. Back to you, Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. So payment gateways, I know a lot of online retailers in Australia think this is easy. Visa, Masters, PayPal, which technology these days, collecting payments is easy. However, when in an exporting kind of environment, what you need to consider is sometimes in some markets, Visa and Master and PayPal is not the most popular or most penetrated payment methods. For example, in China, you have Union Pay in replace of Visa and Masters. Most people will use Union Pay, or they have a lot of new kind of e-payments like WeChat Pay, which is equivalent to PayPal. In China, you got WeChat Pay, you got Alipay. And in different countries, they have their own kind of e-wallet systems that they prefer to use. So obviously think about that, because I think, especially for people that are setting up your own website and trying to reach out to the Chinese consumers, what are the chances people are going to register Visa Master if you don't have one, if they only can pay with Union Pay? You're going to lose that transaction just because you didn't switch on Union Pay, which is a really, really simple step. So always do a little bit of research, understand what's the most popular payment gateway in the local markets to be able, just to collect this money easily. One other big surprise when I was having discussion with Dean and Renee is cash on deliveries, because people thought that's old age transaction methods, and especially with e-commerce, who would pay cash? But in reality, in markets like Indonesia, India, cash on delivery, it's actually a huge preferred payment methods in the local markets. They prefer to pay cash when the delivery guy delivers the product. And basically that means you need to have a trusted partners to handle your cash, and you need to do the phone exchange. You need to think about your logistic partners that can collect the cash on your behalf. And most importantly, cash on delivery usually means there's higher returns if you turn on cash on deliveries, simply because they haven't made a payment, they haven't made a commitment. So if the parcel arrives and then you just say, sorry, I was drunk last night and made a wrong order, and I just can simply reject the parcel on the door step. So definitely think about cash on deliveries, especially if there are some of the Asian markets that you want to approach.
Yep, thanks, Jack. And definitely there's definite pros and cons on that item itself. Okay, and so I guess the last question for Renee on this one cross-border and, managing the payments and in particular foreign exchange costs, right? So, how did you manage that part of it?
Look, I think the platforms that you use definitely take a lot of the hard work out of that. So Shopify Plus for us handles all of that. And then WeChat in China also handle the payment gateways for that market as well. And you definitely have to just budget into your prices the merchant fees and foreign exchange costs that are pretty upfront when you sign up to a new currency with any of these platforms. So my advice would just be to check with whatever platform you're using. They will often have the best or the biggest variety of options for that particular market already available. And then you've just got to find out the cost and build that into your price.
Yeah, excellent. And I think straight away, just from this discussion, and I realize we're kind of running a little bit longer than planned, so probably another 10 or 15 minutes, but definitely there's a lot of considerations in mind. That's why we have government agencies such as Austrade to speak with, and even business owners such as Renee to share their experience. But once we can do those hard yards and all that research and, adapting to the situation, definitely there are significant rewards to grow our business, through the online sales beyond just the local market. Okay, so Jack, I think we're going to move on. We've got some additional sharing, especially from an Austrade perspective.
Alex, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, thanks. So basically, like I said, I tried to put everything in a high level, and unfortunately, we still hit the time mark here. So, but we do have a dedicated e-commerce site called austrade.gov.au/e-commerce. So basically, each of the talking points that I mentioned in the earlier slides, we have a more detailed explanation, pros and cons in each of the steps in this website. And also, we have 13 market-focused e-commerce guide in this page as well. So for those who are interested and wanted to hear more about exporting guides on e-commerce, please feel free to go to the austrade.gov.au/e-commerce site. And thank you, Dan. And that's the presentation for me today.
Excellent, Jack. Thank you. But before we let you go back to your lovely baby girl, so please stay there. I will come back to yourself a little bit later, same as to yourself, Renee. But now what I'd like to do is just for the next few minutes, just talk a little bit about the practical considerations for a cross-border and the shipping itself. So really the first thing is to think about the paperwork. So the standard documents would be the airway bill. So that's typically the agreement with the carrier. And then you have the commercial invoice, which in other words, it's the customs declaration. So those are the basic documents, having a detailed description, itemizing what you are sending. Typically just stating the word gift or sample may not be sufficient from a customs perspective. And then definitely there's resources to help with that as well. If we move on, so the other considerations apart from the paperwork is we mentioned, duty taxes a couple of times. So there is a tool, FedEx Global Trade Manager. It's one of the range of digital tools. Very easily, it can help do a few things for us. It can help provide estimates of what the duties and taxes would be, depending upon the commodity and the market that you are shipping to. It can also help obtain or confirm the relevant documents required. Now that may be specific according to your commodity and again, the market. There may be other documents beyond the commercial invoice, whether it's licenses or permits, etc. Also can give some general destination information about the market that you plan to ship to. So that can also be a very useful research tool. FedEx Global Trade Manager, we call it GTM for short, available on the FedEx website. The next consideration, FedEx Electronic Trade Documents, or ETD. To keep it really simple, if you've already researched the documents that you need and are entering the appropriate detailed descriptions, the FedEx ETD solution can do two things. One, it can help upload your trade documents electronically. Why? Well, that will help initiate the pre-clearance process rather than wait for the shipment to arrive in the destination country. The second thing it can also do from an environmental perspective is reduce the need to print all the additional paperwork because it can be uploaded. That will depend upon the countries involved. Some markets still require hard copies, but for the far majority, we can also save on a lot of printing time and costs. Okay, so to move on from there, so talking about a few other general digital tools and solutions. So moving on to the next slide. So we've already mentioned, of course, Global Trade Manager and electronic trade documents. Simple tools such as FedEx Ship Manager. So it's an online solution where you can actually create all the paperwork, the airway bill and commercial invoice online. Also gives you the option to use your own invoice. Okay, so that's quite easy. And there's a variety of options as well. To manage the billing or reconciling the invoices, we have FedEx Billing Online. So again, another easy way to view and manage your invoices rather than wait for the hard copy. FedEx Tracking, I think, quite straightforward, but there are a lot of options, from notifications to simply being able to log in and view all of your shipments without necessarily knowing the individual tracking details. The last one, I think a lot of people in terms of B2C shipping to residential addresses, FedEx Delivery Manager International. In short, this gives the ability for the residential consumer to customize how they want the delivery, with their local FedEx office. Now that could be designating the delivery day. It could be changing the delivery address, giving particular instructions, or even saying, we will come to the FedEx local office to pick up the package rather than wait for it to be delivered. So imagine it provides a range of flexible options according to the needs of the consumer, whether they're at home or whether they're on holiday. The benefit to the shippers as well is it does help to reduce a substantial number of where are my order inquiries. So for our merchants, it'll save time responding to these queries, because the consumer, as the resident, can help deal with these with their local FedEx office. Okay, so that's just a quick summary of the online tools. And again, we'll share more details in the post-webinar. So I guess in conclusion, about unlocking, global e-commerce, we've had a lot of tips and advice, and definitely making those little bit of extra efforts in the research and asking the questions will pay off. So definitely thank you to Jack and also to Renee for sharing your experience about developing an effective e-commerce strategy. We've mentioned, shipping considerations for cross-border, and also where to get help. Now that could be, online, through your local government agencies, or even through the carrier who you have trusted your shipping with, such as FedEx. Okay, so we're moving toward the end of our session, so just a couple more minutes to go. Just checking, we do have the opportunity for questions and answers, but so far we can see there are no questions yet. But if folks, if there are any, just click on the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar. What we might do to save a little bit of time, I think the information has been so clear, and again, especially for Jack, for helping with that. Looks like we've got all the answers that we actually needed beforehand. So what we might do, we will allow for questions to come in online, but what we might do now is actually move forward to proceed to the online poll. So with the poll, just a few short, simple questions. We really appreciate our audience to take a couple of minutes to help answer. I think there's 5 questions, very straightforward. All it is about providing your feedback about this webinar. If you are interested to join further webinars, if we have those available in future, if you'd like to receive a copy. Question 4, how likely are you to recommend this one? And number 5, remember we're talking about asking questions. Would you like to be contacted by your FedEx account executive to go through the advantages of shipping online, through e-commerce? So we'll allow another minute or so just to give our audience a bit of time to go through these questions. So pretty straightforward. And as you mentioned, this session is being recorded. So the copy of the recording will be available for those who would like to review this, but also for our guests who have registered but may not have been able to join ourselves online. And of course, we'll also be providing a copy of the presentation material from FedEx and from Jack as well. Okay, so I think about another 30 seconds. We'll still keep the poll open just to finish off. Looks like most of the submissions are being completed. So again, we'll just allow a little bit more time there. And I guess, Jack and Renee, you're welcome to fill in the poll as well. Please provide a self-evaluation for your own performance. Okay. How about we'll count down another 10 seconds and then we'll close off the poll. So from 10, 9, 8, okay. Okay, so as we're closing off the poll, we have received a question. How is the return shipment to be done? A definitely good question, as Jack mentioned. I guess for now, the short answer, and thank you, Priscilla, who has raised that question. There are a couple of options. One is for the shipper, if you are preparing a FedEx shipment, at the same time, you have the option to include a return label. Or you could also manage this at the time of the return itself. But there's also other considerations. Do you want to consolidate the returns, have the consumers bring back to a particular point or back to yourselves? But a short version, if you want a one-to-one return, you can do that through the FedEx Ship Manager to create a return shipment. In short, the shipper can authorize the return paperwork so that there are no surprises when the shipment comes back. But again, feel free to reach out. We can always have a local account manager give you more details about that. And so again, thank you to Priscilla for raising. We will close out the poll now. So as we come to conclusion, and I do apologize, we've gone a little bit over time, but we've definitely kept it within the hour mark. So to close off for today's session, again, I would like to give a special thanks to both Jack and Renee for your time in sharing your experience and insights for today's session. I do have one final question to ask both Jack and Renee. My question is there one final advice or tip that you have for our audience today? Of course, in the context of going online with e-commerce. So I might go to Renee first. If you're able to share one final tip or advice, please.
Sure. I just say that be really clear about who you are and where you come from. So we're an Australian brand, we're proudly Australian and we ship from Australia, but then make that shopping experience localized for that market. So their language, obviously the products suit their climate, and that they can check out in their own currency. But I think it's really clear, you've got to be really clear that the product is actually coming from Australia, because there's nothing more frustrating when you buy something online and you didn't know it was coming from far away, or you didn't know the shipping time. So just be completely transparent.
Yeah, excellent, Renee. And I think that's so important, be transparent, but you also mentioned being authentic as well. So thank you for that. And finally, for Jack, I guess proud father Jack, final words from yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I think from my perspective, I think one of the biggest points that I want to raise today is having an e-commerce strategy is not just about putting your product online. And actually, from my personal experience, actually putting things online, putting your product online is only the first step, the beginning of your e-commerce journey. Again, from my personal experience, having baby delivered is really the first step of all the hard work. So really, it's about thinking to strategically build your whole ecosystem, have your freight, have your marketing, have your foreign exchange rates ready to support your overall online exporting strategy, rather than just put things online and wait for things to happen.
Excellent. Thanks, Jake. And like we said, feel free to always ask questions, to help get those answers that you need. Okay, so folks, again, thank you for your time. we will now close out today's webinar, and as mentioned, copies of the presentation and recording will be available. So to Renee, thank you for your time. We'll let you get back to running your successful business. And to Jack, of course, we'll let you get back to your darling baby girl. Thank you, folks. Good to have you join us, and we hope you'll be able to join us in a future session. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.